The Walking Together conference was held at Mary MacKillop Place, North Sydney, on the 30th and 31st of May 2025. Approximately 58 people registered to attend the Friday evening event and 65 were registered for the Saturday. Those registered included guest presenters, clergy, religious and lay people from across the country who came to reflect on and renew their commitment to the path of ecumenism and interreligious engagement. There were 15 dioceses and eparchies represented, and these included Adelaide, Ballarat, Bathurst, Brisbane, Broken Bay, Canberra-Goulburn, Chaldean, Hobart, Lismore, Maitland, Newcastle, Melbourne, the Melkites, Parramatta, Sandhurst and Sydney. Others present were from the Anglican Church, Charles Sturt University, the National Council of Churches in Australia, the University of Queensland, the New South Wales Ecumenical Council, the Hindu Council of Australia, and St Andrew's Greek Orthodox Theological College. Nostra Aetate, 60 years young. Reverend Professor Dan Madigan provided the Saturday morning presentation on interreligious dialogue, highlighting the significance of Nostra Aetate, noting that when the document was promulgated in 1965, the global landscape was vastly different. Father Dan emphasised that dialogue is not simply a theological exercise, but a lived Christian commitment, an expression of fraternity and a mutual search for truth.
Father Dan is a distinguished Jesuit, and for much time he has specialised on interactions and interrelationships with Muslims and Christians. He has a vast experience which he brings to this role. This experience started with language studies and pastoral experience in Pakistan and Egypt. And it might be interesting later to hear from him, maybe, how he came to start in that role in those two countries. This was followed by doctoral studies in Columbia University in the United States. He was a fellow in residence at the Centre for Study of World Religions at Harvard and the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Religions and Culture at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome from 2002 to 2007, and while there lectured in Islamic studies. He returned to the United States and joined the Department of Theology at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., where he was Senior Fellow and Professor of the Woodstock Theological Centre and Centre for Muslim Christian Understanding. Returning to Australia in 2021, he was with the Jesuit community in northern Sydney and then went to Newnham College, a Catholic residential college at Melbourne University, where he has been the rector of the college since January 2024. And there he directs staff and students in Jesuit educational ethos. This role has also enabled him, as a part of the Jesuit community, to contribute to the wider church and secular world, particularly looking at unity. He's able there, within that context, to convene experts from those different communities, Muslim and Jewish and Christian, in order to look together at some of the common topics and issues that concern us all. So, with that introduction, I obviously needed some notes to remember all those places, We look forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for reminding me of all the things that I haven't been getting done, all the things I still have to do. Good morning, everyone, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be with you today. This whole question of interreligious and ecumenical dialogue is something very close to my heart. And to my mind, I'd have to say. Elizabeth suggested I might explain how this came about, and an American Jesuit asked me once how I got into the business of interreligious dialogue and Islamic studies, and I explained to him that it was obedience, and he said, "Oh, the old-fashioned way." Well, I don't know about you, but in Australia, Jesuits still take a vow of obedience. I volunteered for the missions and was asked to go to Pakistan, and I was there 3 years, and then I was supposed to move to China, and just at the last minute, before I left for language school in Hong Kong, a letter came from the general asking me would I do Islamic studies instead, and so the rest is history. I'm not sorry that things worked out that way. I think in those days, that was the 1980s, the middle 1980s, the idea of Muslim-Christian dialogue was still something of a boutique concern in the church. Not a huge number of people involved in it, but of course, come 2001, suddenly everybody wanted to know something about Islam, and so it's been a growth industry ever since, and I've never been short of a job. Michael already cited the beginning of Nostra Aetate, but I've got to have a look initially at some of the text in detail, because I want to point out a few things about unity and communion as he noted, but also about diversity. And I'll touch as we go through on this question of the relationship of ecumenical dialogue and interreligious dialogue, because I think there is something there that is important for us to observe. I'm calling it Nostra Aetate 60 years young. I turned 70 last year, and people started using this terminology, 70 years young. The question about Nostra Aetate is it old now? Has it passed its time? Is it all worked out? Well, 60 years is a long time. But of course, on this occasion, we are celebrating a document which is 1700 years old. And so if Nostra Aetate at 60 years has any importance, then it's scarcely born compared to the Nicene Creed. The beginning of Nostra Aetate. I know this is death. The PowerPoint death is when you put lots of text on the thing and then you turn your back to the audience and read it to them. What we've got here is, it looks to most people as something which is very 1960s. Michael observed, really, well, that's great, thanks. It seems very optimistic. Bonds of friendship are increasing, people are coming more closely together. There's unity, there's charity, what people have in common, bringing them together. What happened? We might note that 1965 was still early in some respects. It was only a couple of years later that we had the Six-Day War and the occupation of the Palestinian territories and so on, which, as we all know, is a major issue in relations between, not just between states, but between religions, and the question of anti-Semitism, the question of Islamophobia. So we, in 1965, sitting in Rome, before a lot of this was taking place, it might have been possible to think this way. Of course, you had other movements, increasing movements for independence in Africa. You had the Cold War really ramping up at that time. In 1965, the Americans were only just getting going in the Vietnam War, what we call the Vietnam War, but the Vietnamese prefer to call the American War. There are so many things that were about to happen when this was written in 1965. But it is important, nonetheless, to recognize that desire for unity, which is there. So the vision of Nostra Aetate, fundamentally, I think, is a vision of unity. It goes on to say, humanity forms but one community. There's one stock, so one origin, one common destiny, one God, whose providence is for all people. So people are gathered together. We are all working, all journeying together to one end. That's the promise. That's the vision of a united humanity. And so Nostra Aetate, in many respects, set in motion a process of learning in the Church to discover this unified action of God. If it's true that humanity is one, if it's true that God is one, if it's true that we have a single origin, and if it's true that we are all headed in the same direction ultimately, how can we see this? Where can we see it? How do we react to it? What is our role in drawing all this together? So that has been a great process of learning, and many of you have been engaged in that. I think of people like John Dubouche from the earliest times of Nostra Aetate and his engagement with Hinduism, with Eastern traditions. Many people have been exploring this, learning to recognize the unity, learning to recognize the singular action of God in the broad universe of religious reality. We are asked by the Council to recognize what's going on, to set up and to enter with prudence and charity into discussion and collaboration with members of other religions, while witnessing to our own faith, of course. And these are the key words, I think: to acknowledge, preserve, and encourage the spiritual and moral truths found among non-Christians, together with their social life and culture. To acknowledge, preserve, encourage, not to stand back and critique, not to nitpick, not to stand over or stand back from, but really to acknowledge this, because from the very beginning they're saying all of this is the work of God. Catholic Church doesn't reject anything that is true or holy in these traditions. It says this principally in chapter 2, talking about Hinduism, Buddhism, Eastern traditions, and so on, before it moves on to Islam and then to Judaism. But this policy really engages right across the board. But let's look at it closely. The Church doesn't reject anything that is true or holy in these religions. It has a high regard for the manner of life and conduct, the precepts and doctrines, which, although it differs, they differ from the way we do things, the way we see things. Nonetheless, they often reflect a ray of that truth which enlightens all men and women. This is a passage which has been, it's got, in some respect you could say it's had a lot of attention, but I think sometimes it's slightly superficially read. This is, it's standing back a bit. Often, not always, they reflect, they're not the actual thing, but they're reflecting something, reflecting a ray of that truth, singular notice, that truth that enlightens all men and women. A lot of people have read this as simply an affirmation that, well, all religious traditions are true. But I think if we read it carefully, we note that what is being said is there is a truth. The truth is singular, and that truth enlightens all people, and you will catch glimpses of it here and there. You will catch suggestions of it, reflections of it. I think it's important to recognize just how Nostra Aetate is not letting go of the idea that there is a single truth. It's not letting go of the idea that alongside the unity of all creation and the unity of our origin, the unity of our destination, if you like, there is a unity of truth. And this is where the big but comes in. You know, yes, we recognize here and there glimpses, reflections, twinklings of the same ray of light which we have seen in Jesus Christ. But we proclaim, and we are in duty bound to proclaim without fail, Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life. In him, in whom God reconciled all things to himself, people find the fullness of their religious life. We can read that as being a bit arrogant, and perhaps some people do mean it arrogantly. I'm just going to get a glass of water. But it's important to recognize that really all religious traditions have a sense. Well, no, scrub that. Never say all religions. Any time you see a sentence that starts with all religions, well, rub it out. We can't make statements like that about all religions do this. Many religions, most religions, would see the world of religions as being mostly wrong, or not too bad, but not all the way there, somewhat deficient. It's very rare to find any religious tradition that thinks that every other religious tradition is just fine. So I don't think that it's something necessarily to be embarrassed about, that we want to say we have witnessed a certain truth and we live that truth. We have the taste of what it is to live that way. We belong to a community that is trying to live by that truth, and everything about it, everything about the history of our community tells us that yes, that is true. Even though we've failed to live it, even though we are sinners, nonetheless, we're committed to that truth. And mutatis mutandis, people of many religious traditions will say exactly the same thing. I believe that what I am doing, that the practice I have adopted, that the community to which I belong, that the tradition which has taught me, that the people who surround me in this belief are on the right track. So let's not back off from this bit, but it is possible to speak of a commitment to truth, the truth of one's own tradition, in all humility, because there is nothing about Christianity which owes itself to the perfection of Christians. Christians are saying, we have recognized something God is doing. We think we have recognized, we believe we have recognized something that God is doing in Jesus Christ that is the truth we are prepared to live by and gamble on, if you like, bet our lives on this. You can do that in all humility, and we must do it in all humility. There's been, when Dominus Jesus came out in the year 2000, there was a lot of talk and criticism of the idea of deficiencies, the deficiencies of other churches, the deficiencies, or we mustn't call it churches, sorry, the deficiencies of other ecclesial communities, the deficiencies of other religions. But all religions have that. If you think that something is important, you're going to say of a tradition that doesn't see it as important that there's a deficiency there. Many non-Catholic churches would see the Catholic Church as deficient because we do not ordain women. We are considered to have rather too distant a connection to Scripture, too much of a hierarchical approach, too much of a fixation on tradition. That, for many churches, is a deficiency. That's not the way the real church ought to be, they would say. Muslims would say that Christianity seems deficient in a way. We don't have the original text of the gospel. We've got four canonical things that claim to be the gospel, and lots of others besides. Or our Trinitarian faith would seem to be deficient from the point of view of monotheism. It's not a problem. It's not a problem to recognize difference. And of course, if we consider those elements really an important part of truth, then yes, of course, they will be seen, their lack will be seen as deficiencies. So, in spite of the fact that Nostra Aetate begins with a focus on the unity of God's action, one economy of salvation, I think they would say, for many people, the take-home message in its simplest form has been that all religions are valid and ultimately, in essence, the same paths to salvation. I don't know how many times we've had to listen to the idea that all these things are just different paths crisscrossing up the hill to the same top, that really we're all the idea of the single destination that all people are on the way to is simply being arrived at by different paths, and it doesn't really matter which path you take, you'll end up at the top of the mountain. But that's a position that really doesn't take people seriously. People are not simply saying the same thing in different words. Alex can explain to us, I'm sure, and many people can. Nirvana is not just a fancy way of saying heaven in another language. What is being proposed by different religious traditions as the top of the mountain, or our aim, our ultimate goal, is not the same. They're not just all saying, well, heaven, with different names for it, and we'll all get there. No, different religions see salvation differently, as they are entitled to do. But we tend to put it through a sieve and say, well, yeah, salvation is one, therefore everyone's going to the same place, therefore it doesn't really matter as long as you get there. We need to take people's difference seriously. We need anyone who thinks that all religions are saying the same thing is not listening to people of other religions. We must respect difference. We must hear difference. I think here we have an example. I think if we think of the climate crisis that we're facing at the moment, think of that as an analogy. If you privatize it, if you say, well, Victoria will do this. We'll have lots of fossil fuels, and we don't particularly want to have the controls that New South Wales wants to impose. Or if the Capital Territory, for example, decided that it would have quite different emission standards from the New South Wales that surrounds it, you'd see. I mean, it's absurd. The wind doesn't observe state boundaries and territory boundaries. All of this, we are in this together. We are living in a single human sphere. That's true of the environment. We recognize that this has to be a conversation which crosses all sorts of barriers because we breathe one air. Ultimately, we have one ocean, we have one planet, and we have to find out how together to live healthily on this planet, not simply decide as individual groups that we have a right to be different. And the same is true of our religious attitudes, because the positions that we take as religious people on questions of rights, on questions of law, on questions of war and peace, on questions of equality, all those things have an effect on the human ecosphere. And so we're engaged together, not simply in a religious marketplace where it doesn't matter what brand of soft drink you choose to buy from this thing. We're engaged in something where we as human beings are trying to work out how to live together, how to believe together, how to take seriously our community that Nostra Aetate began by talking about, how to take seriously that oneness of human origin and human destiny, that oneness of the human ecosphere, which takes in politics, it takes in environmentalism, it takes in everything. how can we do this together? So dialogue between religions is not simply, well, sometimes people talk about it as though it's traveller's tales. You know, we're all crisscrossing this mountain, and occasionally you come across a Buddhist who's going up that path, and you know, we meet the Buddhist, but I'm going by that path, and I'll see you at the top. But you know, we can tell one another what it's been like. You know, oh, I came up that way; it was really difficult. You know, no, I found a much easier way to do it. This is not what's going on. We are not simply swapping travellers' tales on our crisscrossing ways by different paths to the top of the same mountain. No, we are engaged in a human negotiation of how to live together, how to believe together, how to understand God's creation, even if that word makes any sense to some religious traditions. How are we to understand humanity? How are we to understand equality? Because we are not separate. We are living together in a single ecosphere. So people of faith are not just swapping tales in dialogue. We are engaging with one another. We must engage. There has been a movement, quite common really, to say, well, let's try and come to a single statement. And that I've been very much involved over the years with a statement called a common word, addressed. It was a letter addressed to Pope Benedict and other religious leaders by 138 Muslim scholars, suggesting that what we have in common, particularly between Jews, Christians and Muslims, is the dual commandment of love, to love God and to love the neighbour. And that this would form a very good basis for dialogue and for agreement. And in a way, it was a very generous offer, and I read it, I think, as you might say the first really formal Muslim response to Nostra Aetate in many respects. If you read it that way, here is the thing. Okay, looking at the unity, looking at the possibility of finding a common word, finding some kind of agreement on the basis of which we can then move forward to work together for justice and for development. But at the same time, it was, I think, reducing the individuality of the three traditions, which are not the same. We do have a call to come to a word in common. We do have a call to keep listening, to keep speaking, to keep trying to understand the other, to recognize our common life on this planet, and to work for peace and justice together. But, and here I think, for me, this is a really important but. Religion, from a Christian point of view, is not, as many people seem to think, a set of obligations and prohibitions and rituals that one has to observe in order not to infuriate God. There's a common sense of religion that here it is, there are different systems, and you choose that system, and you don't do this, and you do that, and you do this at that time. I used to get so frustrated by these. There were children's books. There was one, it was from Germany, I think, and you had a child's face, and it's kind of as a circular thing that you could keep moving around. And so it was simply, you moved the wheel, and the dress changed, the colour of the face changed, the day of prayer changed. So these were simply, there were certain things that religions do. You dress a certain way, you eat a certain way, you pray a certain day, and it really doesn't matter. They're all interchangeable, just move the wheel around. But we have forgotten, perhaps. I think Christians have played along with this game. That religions are simply variations on a theme of obligation, prohibition, ritual, and text. No, in some sense, Christianity is almost an anti-religion. We are not saying, the gospel is not saying, this is what you have to do. The gospel is saying what God has done, what God is doing. The gospel, we would say, but we don't always read it this way, the gospel is giving us good news about what God has done and what is possible. It is not imposing on us simply more stringent commands than the Torah imposed on the Jewish people, because that's not what it's about. It's breaking out of that sense that with the right observances you will then be on God's good side and you'll get to the top of the mountain. No. The gospel is not about the love we have to perform. The gospel fundamentally is about the love God has shown, is showing, the love God is. And that changes things radically. So it's really key, I think, when we get into interreligious dialogue, that we do not simply have a cookie-cutter version of what religions are and just simply, swap out the language or the day of worship or the fasting practices or the texts. We are not people of to be people of the gospel is not to be people simply of a text. It is to be people, come back to the creed from Nicaea, to be people who believe that the Word was made not text but flesh. I could go on all day about that, but I won't dare. So, if we're looking for something to say together, if we're looking for a word in common, as religions, as believers, what might that word be? Should we go along with the common word document and say, well, the word we have in common is love God and love your neighbour? Will that suffice? Or should we rather find a word which is a little more humble? The word I propose that we should adopt together. Well, I've got a Greek version and a Latin version. We may need to find some other version as well. But what about mea culpa? What about Kyrie eleison? What is the word religions need, believers need to say to each other and to say to the world? Mea culpa. That would be a good start if we could acknowledge our failures rather than trot out our ideals and say how wonderful they are. We believe in peace, we believe in love, we believe in equality. Nobody takes us seriously. Study history. What about if we started with mea culpa? What if we started by recognizing that yes, we are all one, and fundamentally we are all one in our failure. We are all one in our need for God's mercy. We are all one in our complete inability to bring creation to its completion without God doing it. Let's start with, yes, it's our fault that the world is this way. I think I'm safe in saying that many people, most people perhaps in this room, will remember from a few years ago that book, I'm Okay, You're Okay, but transactional analysis. And the best way to deal with people, what we're aiming at is to have interactions with people in which we end up with a situation, I'm okay, you're okay. And that's what we've been doing in interreligious dialogue for so long. We sit at tables like this and work through to the point where we're saying to one another, yes, I see you, yes, you're okay, yes, oh, yes, we both agree on peace, we both agree on justice, we both agree on freedom, you're okay, and I'm okay, let's have a cup of tea. But I don't think that that is our aim in interreligious dialogue. In the world, as it is at the moment, we need to be able to sit at tables like this and start by recognizing that we are not okay. We have wronged one another. We are still engaged in wronging one another. We are still, for example, Muslims and Christians. We are engaged in a worldwide economic system which is oppressing a substantial part of the world's population. We're engaged in it, in trade, in mining, in the oil industry. We are complicit in many injustices together, in the arms trade. We, with the Jews, Christians with Jews, we are complicit in many ways in injustices and wrongs. We have our history of failure. We have our current failures. So if Nostra Aetate's sense of the unity of all people is to be accepted, and I think it is, let us be honest and accept that it is a unity of need. It is a unity calling for repentance. It is a unity crying out for honesty about ourselves, because then God may be able to do something. The truth about ourselves will set us free to allow God to work something. Before I open up to your questions and comments, I just want to add a couple of texts for your consideration. This one, yeah. I'm not going to tell you yet who is the author of this. We'll take a vote later. What we need, however, is respect for the beliefs of others, and the readiness to look for the truth in what strikes us as strange or foreign. For such truth concerns us and can correct us and lead us further along the path. What we need is the willingness to look behind the alien appearances and look for the deeper truth hidden there. This author goes further. Furthermore, I need to be willing to allow my narrow understanding of truth to be broken down. I shall learn my own truth better. Shh. I need to be willing to allow my narrow understanding of the truth to be broken down. I shall learn my own truth better if I understand the other person and allow myself to be moved along the road to God, who is ever greater, certain that I never hold the whole truth about God in my own hands, but am always a learner, on pilgrimage toward it, on a path that has no end. This was not Karl Rahner. This was not some radical South American. This was Joseph Ratzinger. Before he became Pope, before he became infallible, so this may be wrong, but this is wild stuff. And during his pontificate, there were plenty of moves to kind of gloss over that. But he's on record. It's there. We do not have a monopoly on the truth. Nostra Aetate, in its speaking about the unity of truth, is not saying we've got the whole truth and nobody else has got any. It's not even saying that we've got most of the truth and they've got none. This is what it's saying, that truth is one, and together we can find it. We will find it by listening to one another. We will find it in dialogue. We will find it by recognizing that those glimpses and rays and reflections do shine out in other traditions. One more from another radical. Today, every day should see a renewal of our dialogue. This is important. We, rather than those to whom it is directed, our dialogue, should take the initiative. We should take the initiative. Even more important, before speaking, we must take great care to listen. In my line of work, I've so often heard people say, "Oh, you can't dialogue with Muslims," by which they actually mean, I talk to Muslims and I tell them, and they don't accept what I say. They're not saying, I listen to Muslims and we discover things together. No. When they say Muslims can't dialogue, they're saying, I'm telling them, and they're just not listening. And we've been saying the same things for 1400 some years, expecting people simply to accept what we say. We're not listening and engaging and thinking, well, maybe that's a good question. And we listen not only to what people say, but more especially, he says, I've given half the thing away, it's a he, but more especially to what they have it in their hearts to say. And that to me is really important. Not just the words that are coming out, but what's going on. Where are the desires? Where are the hopes? Where is the vision? To start by listening to what people have in their hearts. Only then will we understand them and respect them, and even as far as possible, agree with them. Anyone want to say who it was? Our author? Sorry, I can't hear. Oh, no. But Leo, that's really modern. No. You can feel it has a papal feel to it, doesn't it? It's Paul VI. Wonderful, wonderful letter called Ecclesiam Suam, which he wrote just as he was restarting the Second Vatican Council, and he called it a simple conversational letter. But he sets the whole thing up, everything about his vision for the church and the world as dialogue. So I recommend it to you all. And given the time, even though some of my time was stolen at the beginning, let me open the floor to some questions or comments. Thanks. Michael?
Thanks very much. At the time Nostra Aetate was written, as you've touched on, back in the 1960s, our societies have evolved a lot, and we look at Australian society now, look at our census. There's lots of people who have no faith. How do you believe in that sort of context that we're working in now, that we, the people who are engaged in the humanism, interreligious dialogue, can speak to the people of no faith at all in contemporary society?
That's a very good question. To go back to the Nicene Creed, we'll go back to John's Gospel, the Word became flesh. Now, part of our problem, I think, and if you like, the failure of our evangelization is that we have turned the flesh back into words. That's a line from N.T. Wright. He said, the Word became flesh, and we've been busy ever since trying to change it into words of comfort, words of challenge, words of this, words of that. If we want to speak to people who have no faith, we have to recognize that they fail to see in us something worth believing in. They fail to get a taste from us of a way of life which seems truly, wonderfully, deeply human. There's a great line I heard from a Methodist leader who was preaching in Rome, and he said, we behave a bit like real estate agents for the kingdom of God. We're saying, as though we're selling off a subdivision. I've got the exclusive rights to sell this thing, to sell salvation, and you can get it here if you want to buy into this wonderful. You want to get the housing plot with the best views. You can get it from us. And so he's saying, you've got to join us. You've got to come here. You'll be saved. And this applies not only to Christians, but he said, no, we are not salespeople for the kingdom of God. We are supposed to be free samples. The church is to be a free sample that anybody can have a taste of for a kingdom way of living, the kind of living that Nostra Aetate outlines there in chapter 1. This is the vision God has for human flourishing and for bringing all together as a unity, to bring everything to completion so that God will be all in all. And yet, too often, what people see in us is people thumping the lectern and saying, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. Or, of course, our own moral failures. both personal and political and all those things. They all count. What's the taste of living that people get from us? That's got to be our evangelization. If the Word became flesh, there is no other way to proclaim that Word except in our own flesh and blood. And if we're not doing that, we're not going to transform people of no faith into people of faith. And it's worth saying, I think, that when we say they are people who have no faith, we need to acknowledge, first of all, they don't have faith in us and what we're saying. Not that they don't necessarily have faith, they may be grasping for something to believe in, something to hope for. So it's not their failure to believe, it's perhaps more our failure to be believable.
I'm just conscious that we're running out of time. Maybe we just take one last quick question, because we are moving into numbers, which is not important. So I'm aware of our time, that's fine.
I'm just questioning this notion of faith. Faith is intrinsic to Christianity, but I don't think faith is intrinsic to Judaism, and I'm not sure about Islam. Because both Judaism and Islam are religions that are religions of Christian word. Both of these are practices, traditions, customs, sets of behaviours that are sewn into ourselves, that are part of what we do. But it's not really, it's not necessarily about a faith in a higher being.
Well, later in the morning you'll have an opportunity to hear Muslims on the subject of whether faith is essential to Islam. I think it is. It's clearly right up there. We could say of Judaism, one needs to distinguish people who identify themselves as Jewish sort of culturally, but are not particularly believers. And many Christians are in the same boat. There's a certain hangover of Christian culture and the Christian practice, but not necessarily real faith, real trust in God. But I wouldn't make that kind of distinction among the three. I mean, each religion, of course, is entitled to say what it likes. But if you think of to read the Hebrew Bible and the voice of God constantly addressing people and saying, "No, don't be afraid. Trust me. You are precious in my eyes. You are honored, and I love you. I am your God. You will be my people." I mean, that's a dialogue of faith. It's trust me when I say to you, I will be with you. Trust me when I say, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. So, I'm leaving questions of cultural religion aside. I think it's very important to recognise that the threeness and the oneness of these traditions, because and this is where it dovetails a bit with the question of ecumenicism. But I think there is a lot more. We have a lot more in common in Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue, a lot more in common with ecumenical dialogue than perhaps the dialogue with religious traditions and religious believers, or religious practices, who are in traditions that don't have a foundational opinion about Christianity. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are in many respects siblings that have diverse readings of the same history, diverse readings of the same texts, diverse readings, diverse understandings of what God has been up to from the creation right up until the current time. And so we are, in many respects, we're in a similar kind of dialogue as with other churches, believers of other churches, because they are reading the same texts in different ways. We appeal to the same authorities for different purposes. So I think there's a lot to be looked at in that ecumenical relationship. But we'll have a chance to talk over coffee. Michael.
Dan, thank you for such a rich presentation. Can I invite Elizabeth to offer a vote of thanks to you? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for the wealth of your own formation and years of study and work. I can see why you're in some of the roles that you're in today, in the formation of the Jesuit community, in the formation of students, helping them to depth their understanding of God and religion. The way that you opened up that document this morning, I've read it several times and gone through it, but the depth and the much deeper understanding that you've given us is that there's a huge amount of ideas there that we need to take away and reflect on. So we are extremely grateful for you for coming in the midst of all your busy life to take the time to share that and break open those words for us all. Thank you very much.
Time that will come to eternity.